Masechet Sotah Daf Tet Zayin. We're going through the steps of preparing the Sotah waters, and the next step here is that we need to get some dust from the earth. Pasuk here says, "Velakacha kohen mayim kedoshim bekli chares umin ha'afad asher yeh bekarka hamishkan." So we already talked about the water and the earthenware vessel, and he has to take afad, earth, from the floor of the Mishkan. V'natan el hamayim, and puts it upon the water that's in the earthenware vessel. All right, so let's see exactly where he gets this water from. The Mishnah mentioned that he makes a right and he lifts up a tile and he takes some of the earth that is under the tile in the Bet HaMikdash. But now we're going to quote a Midrash Halakha that analyzes these words precisely. So since it says min ha'afad asher yihiyeh, from the earth that is there or that will be there, so it says will be there, so maybe that means you can get it from outside. Get some from home, from any field outside of the Temple Mount, and bring it in, right? And just have to bring it into the Temple Mount. How do you know it has to be from the floor of the Bet HaMikdash? Talmud Omar bekarka hamishkan. It says the floor of the Mishkan, so that's how I know it has to be there. Now we're going to take that so literally. What if there isn't any loose floor on the floor of the Mishkan? Do you have to take a kardom, an axe, and dig down until you get some dirt? Talmud Omar asher yeh. No, but it says asher, that will be there. So how can we balance out these two things? What do you mean asher yeh? Asher yeh in the future tense sounds like it's not there now, but it will be there, which implies that you can bring it in, right? It's not there now, but it will be there because I'll bring some in from outside. That's so. Yeh sounds like I can bring it outside. Karka sounds like it has to be there, and I didn't have to axe. Dig down with an axe to get to it. Hakesad yesham have and sham ten sham. So we say we can reconcile both of these phrases. If there is some loose dirt there, then bring from the loose dirt. But if there's no loose dirt there, you don't have to go and start digging down. Rather, you can bring some from outside, put it down on the floor, and then that is sufficient to be bekarka hamishkan. So that's what the full phrase asher yeh and bekarka hamishkan. Okay, all that is one baraita. Now we have a second baraita that's a bit different. Tanya idach umin ha'afad asher yeh melamed she'em metaken mibachutz u'machnis. And over here we start off with the premise that if you want, you can bring in from outside and put it on the floor of the Mishkan, and that's fine. All that we learned just from the Yihiyeh, right? That's totally fine. Now, bekarka, this sounds like it's a Halakha techila, right? But in the previous version, that was only if there's none, then you have to do that. But here, you could do that. It's fine. Bekarka Mishkan. So what does karka Mishkan teach us? If I already know that, yes, totally fine to bring it in from outside. Isi ben Yuda omer lehavi karka shilo no v'givon ubet olamim. So Isi ben Yehuda says this comes to include not only, so the pasuk says karka hamishkan, by which I would say maybe only the Mishkan, but the Mishkan moves around, and eventually there is a permanent spot on Harabait in Yerushalayim. So Bekarka Mishkan comes to teach us that you can use the dirt on the floor, whether the Mishkan is in Shiloh, or when it was in Nov, or when it was in Giv'on, or even when it's in a permanent place in the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, so each of these has a reason why, maybe I would think since it's moving around, so maybe the dirt itself doesn't become holy. No, it does become holy. Wherever the Mishkan is, that dirt is usable for the Sotah. And since it says Mishkan, I might think maybe it has to be the Mishkan, a movable Mishkan. But maybe once there's Bet HaMikdash, this did pose a practical challenge to the sages, because it was all tiled with marble, and so they actually had to leave a loose tile so that they could get underneath and get some dirt. And so from here we learned that it doesn't matter whether it's a Mishkan, wherever the Mishkan was, or if it's a permanent structure, the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, the earth of that place, wherever it is, is good to be used for Sotah. All that was the opinion of Isi ben Yehuda. However, there's another Isi ben Menachem Omer, Eno Sarich, Uma Betuma Kala Lo Halakha Katu Betuma Eshet Ish, Chamora Lo Kol Sheken. He says, I can learn that from a Kal Vachomer, from the laws of Tum'ah. Regarding Tum'ah, you're not allowed to enter the sanctuary when a person is Tameh. And so, if that's true, if that's true regarding tum'ah, which is relatively light, there's no capital punishment if one is tameh, you touched a dead rodent and then enters the Bet HaMikdash. There's no capital punishment for that, and nevertheless, the pasuk makes no distinction. You cannot enter the sanctuary, whether that's the Mishkan, whether Mishkan is here or there or the Bet HaMikdash. It's the same law for everything. So, betumat eshet ish chamura. So, regarding Sotah, which will come to clarify whether this woman violated eshet ish, and that's chamura, because that would be capital punishment of strangulation if she was found guilty with 2 witnesses and all that. So, all the more so. In other words, if the Bet HaMikdash has the same prohibition of entering when one is tameh, and that's a lenient thing, all the more so for a stringent thing, it would be the same law everywhere. And so therefore, I don't need these extra words to come and teach me that law. I could figure that from a Kal Vachomer. If you can't enter any places when you're tameh, certainly you can use the dirt from any of these places for the Sotah waters. So, rather, Karka Mishkan teaches that you cannot bring it in a basket from home, right? Bring a basket of dirt and then use that. No, you have to. You can, if you bring it in from outside, you have to put it on the floor first, wait a few seconds, and then you can use it, right? But it has to go on the floor of the sanctuary or of the Bet HaMikdash, wherever it is, first, and only then it can be used. All right, all that is the second Braita. Now, question. If you don't have dirt, how about ashes, right? Afad with an ayin means earth, dirt, whereas efer means ashes. According to Bet Shammai, we're not even going to ask the question, because Bet Shammai clearly distinguishes between ashes and dust. These are 2 separate categories, and he never says that you can use ashes instead of earth. So he would definitely say no. But Bet Hillel does say in a different context that you can use ashes instead of dirt. Where is that? When you have to cover the blood of a behemah or a bird, when you do shechita, the blood goes on the floor, you have to cover it with dirt. How about ashes? Bet Hillel says ashes is okay too, right? Maybe you're in some place and I don't know why you can't find dirt, but you're in some place it's all paved, you can't find dirt, you can use ashes. So since Bet Hillel, in at least one context, in other contexts, says that ashes can be used for dirt, so how about here, if you don't have dirt on the floor of the Bet HaMikdash, can you use ashes? On the one hand, even though he says the word afad can refer to efed, right? And so the word itself can mean that. However, here it doesn't only say afad, it says karka hamishkan, right? Here's the pasuk again. Min afad. Fine, that could mean ashes. But karka mishkan, on the floor, what's usually on the floor? Earth, not ashes. So therefore, I would say here it has to be earth. Or maybe it says karka mishkan here not to teach me that ashes is no good, but rather that phrase is to teach me what the 2 Isis, either one of them, said, either that you can use the dirt on the floor of any of the sanctuaries in the Bet HaMikdash or with the sanctuary Mishkan, wherever it was, or to teach me the law of Isi ben Menachem, that if I bring something in from outside, I just have to put it on the floor first for a few seconds so that it's on the floor. But maybe I could get ashes and put ashes on the floor, and then that's also fine. Okay, so that's the question we're going to try to answer. We're going to bring two basic answers. The first one's going to be quite long and will be somewhat conclusive. Nevertheless, we're going to bring a second, shorter answer that will not be conclusive. Okay, so here's the first answer. Tashema Tamar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Bishlosha Mekomot Halakha Okebet Mikra. A very interesting baraita that says, in the name of Rabbi Ishmael, that there are three places in halakha where the halakha, the final verdict, the oral law, supersedes the simple reading of the pasuk. Right, the pasuk says one thing, but the oral tradition from Sinai says no. Don't follow what the Torah seems to say. Rather, the halakha is different and actually uproots. Remember, there's lots and lots of cases of a midrash that will add to what the Torah says, right? So that's, or define what does the Torah mean by melacha, or that says, listen, lo tevashel gidi b'chalev imo, also you should add on a fowl, right? So yeah, there's lots of places where a midrash or the halacha will add to what the pasuk says. But here are three cases where it doesn't just add, it actually uproots the peshat of the Torah. Here's three cases. And the proof of this is going to be that ours here is not one of them, right? Because it says afar, and if you say that efed is afar, then that's uprooting the simple meaning. And this is not included in these three, and therefore the answer should be no. Okay, let's see what the three are. HaTorah amra be'afar, v'halacha bechol davar. Regarding the covering of the blood, the Torah says afar, it has to be dirt, but yet the halacha says you can use anything that's similar to dirt, like crushed up bricks. That's also good. So that's one place. Second one, HaTorah amra betar, halacha bechol davar. The Nazir is not allowed to shave. The Torah only says that he can't shave with a razor, but maybe he would be able to remove his hair in other ways. No, the halakha says the Nazir cannot remove his hair in any way, not only with a razor, but in other ways as well. So it's true, it's kind of adding on, but in a way it's uprooting, because the Torah just says ta'ar, and now the halakha says other things, anything. HaTorah amra sefer, v'halacha bechol davar. If someone wants to give a get, the Torah says sefer keritut. Sefer literally doesn't mean a book. Books were not invented until Roman times. Sefer means a scroll. So I would say it has to be a scroll. It has to be written as a scroll, like all the laws that we would know, anything that a scroll looks like, on parchment, rolled up. However, the halakha is not so. The halakha is that you can write a get on papyrus, on a wooden board, on anything detached from the ground that's suitable for writing. You can write a get. And so here again, these are three cases where the halakha supersedes the peshat of the pasuk. V'imita lachshovna mihai. Now, if you would say that you can use ashes instead of afar, well, then this should be counted also as one of them. And since it's not counted, it means that you cannot use ashes for the Sotah. Okay, so that seems to be a good proof. However, we're going to reject the proof because Tana v'shiyer, maybe this is not a complete list, it's not a comprehensive list. Rabbi Ishmael brought three, but maybe there's many other examples. And the afar efed of Sotah would be another example. It just didn't bring every single example. It just brought three representative examples. Okay, if you want to say that it left out examples, that's the rule is you have to leave out at least two examples to say it's not a comprehensive list, because nobody would leave out just one more. If you have three examples and there's only one more, so bring the one more, right? You don't write etc. If you have a list of 4 items, you wouldn't write 1, 2, 3, etc. Just bring the fourth one. You only say etc. when there's at least 2 things that you're leaving out. So we have to, in order for this rejection to work, we have to prove that there's something else that uproots the Torah that is also not included. So what else is not included? Shiyer Mesorah, the case of Mesorah, of how much hair does a Mesorah have to shave during his purification ritual? The Mesorah shaves his hair on first and seventh day of his purification ritual. So, and he has to shave. The Torah says he shaves all of his hair. So let's see how the Baraita says it. So this is talking about the second shaving that he does on the seventh day. The literal meaning of the Torah here is that he would shave all of his hair, but actually the Torah goes on and limits that. Kilal, that's a kilal. The Torah says a kilal upratu klal. So first it says all of his hair. Then it says et rosho, et zekano, et gabot einav. Perat, and then it lists specifically the hair on the head, the hair on his face, and his eyebrows. So sounds like only those three areas of hair. And then the continuation of the pasuk says all the hair. So that sounds like everything. So how are we going to reconcile this? Kilal upratu kilal iyatadan ela ka'ayna pirat. Ma pirat meforash mekom kinus se'ar v'nir'eh afkol makom kinus se'ar v'nir'eh. So since we have a kilal upratu kilal, we're going to look at the details and say whatever is similar to the details in a key aspect. What are the key aspects of these of the examples? It's any place that hair is gathered. In other words, there's a lot of hair in one place, and it's also seen. If a person is just standing straight, the hair is visible, even if they're not wearing clothes. The hair is visible, so it has to be collected and visible. Anything like that. So So what would that include? That's not in the details. That would include se'ar is a nice way of saying pubic hair, which is gathered in one place and is visible when a person is just standing there without clothing on. So yes, a Mesorah has to shave that area. So what is excluded that the Mesorah does not have to shave on his seventh day? It will exclude hair in the underarms, because person standing straight, you can't see their underarms, so therefore you don't. And the rest of the body, hair on one's arms, which is not collected. There's just a little bit of hair. It's not all collected it's not concentrated there. So for those areas, the rest of one's body, the Mesorah does not have to shave. Okay, all that is what we learned from a derasha. However, what's the actual halakha? In the Mishnah, ve'ilcheta, see, the word halakha can have two meanings. It can mean something that's an oral tradition from Sinai, or it can mean the final halakha. Sometimes it's both. Maybe it is the final halakha because it's an oral tradition. Okay, but anyway, the halakha as taught in the Mishnah is megaleach kedala'at. The Mesorah has to shave his entire hair, his entire body, until he is smooth like a gourd, right? A gourd is nice and smooth, no hair at all, meaning the entire body totally. Ditnan, balo lakif et ha-Mesorah ma'avir tar al kol besaro, v'k'tain sefer aviyom ha-shivim megalechot tiglachat sheniya ketiglachat rishona. And the Mishnah specifies both of the shavings of the Mesorah. The first shaving has to be total, and the next Mishnah says the second shaving on the seventh day is just like the first shaving, and meaning that it's a total shaving of all of the hair. And so here we have another example where even though the pasuk, right, if you read the klal uprat klal of the pasuk, right, what we would derive from it, and we're assuming that the rasha is the peshat of the pasuk, because what is the peshat of the pasuk? It says something contradictory. So this is the meaning. This is the plain meaning of the pasuk, means only the hair on the head and of the privates, and yet the halakha comes and uproots it and says, for the first and the seventh day shavings, you shave all of his hair. And so here we have, yes, another example that Rabbi Ishmael left out of this list, and that's how we know the list is not comprehensive, and therefore there's no proof from this list to our question. Okay, but now we're going to say three responses to this, why Mesorah is not a good example of something that's left out of the list. It's not an example of a law that supersedes the pasuk. So three responses. Number one, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak ki kach hashib halakha okebet mikra ha okebet midrabanan hi. No, in this list, Rabbi Shmuel was only counting places where the oral law supersedes the simple reading of the pasuk. But here, it's not superseding a simple reading, it's superseding a derabanan interpretation. This is very, very important actually, because whenever we see a derasha, like a klal upratu klal, or other types of derashot, should we assume that the rabbis consider that the pshat, the meaning of the pasuk, right? That's what the pasuk means, or did they recognize no, there is a pshat, and this is a rabbinic added interpretation of the pasuk, and so so beforehand we were assuming that that's the peshat, but on this answer it says no, this is okevet midrabanan. This klal upratu klal is not the peshat of a pasuk; it's only a derabanan interpretation, and therefore it doesn't fit into this category because here's a halakha that's uprooting a derabanan interpretation, meaning that derashot through the Yagmidot Shatran Bahem are not Peshat, but rather only the Rabbanans. This would support Rambam against Ramban, a very famous machloket that they have in the second Shodesh of Sefer HaMisvot. Rambam says you do not count just because the rabbis learn a law from a derasha doesn't mean that you'd count that as one of the 613, unless the Gemara says specifically this is a deoraita, or this is from Sinai. If it doesn't say that, you don't necessarily count it just because you learn it from a pasuk. And Ramban says, "What are you talking about? This you're changing the whole system." Every time the rabbis always say they learn things from everything we learn from pasuk. So if you learn it from pasuk, then that is the meaning of the pasuk, and so it should be counted. Okay, so this would be a proof anyway for Harambam. Okay, second reason why this Mesorah wouldn't be on the list anyway. Rapapa amar ki chashib halakha okebet ve'okedet ha okebet umosefet hi. In this list, we're only counting things where the halakha both supersedes and uproots entirely the meaning of the pasuk, like the halakha is the opposite of what the pasuk says. But here, you're right, although it is superseding, but it's actually adding. Whereas the pasuk, the derasha, the klal pratu klal says, the Mesorah should shave his head and privates, but only, and then the halakha comes and adds, shave those also, and then continue on and shave also his arms and his legs and his back and the rest of his body. So it's not really uprooting; it's only adding. Okay, so that's why that it wouldn't be in this case. It wouldn't be included here anyway. And Rav Asher says, "Amar hamatnita mane Rabbi Ishmael hi dedarish kelale uferate kedalat mane Rabbi Akiva hi dedarish ribuye umiute." Rav Asher has a fantastic and very, very important answer. He says this baraita that says the klal upratu klal. Who is the author of that? It's Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael is the one who employs klal upratu klal. That's a Rabbi Ishmael exegetical tool. But whereas the Mishnah that says he has to be shaven totally as smooth as a gourd, who's the author of that Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva, which is true in general, that the Mishnah, although the Mishnah does quote Rabbi Ishmael, but you can see that in the next generation after Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, it quotes many of Rabbi Akiva's students and very few of Rabbi Ishmael's students. So the Mishnah in general that we have is the Mishnah from the school of Rabbi Akiva. Some people theorize that there was in fact once upon a time another Mishnah from the school of Rabbi Ishmael, and there's good reasons and sources to hypothesize that such a Mishnah existed. But anyway, Rav Asher's point is that this is not a case of a halakha uprooting a pasuk. This is actually a machloket. The Mishnah and this baraita have two different opinions. You follow one or the other, not both. So even though Rabbi Akiva said that you have to be shaven totally like a gourd. That's because he follows the different exegetical principle of ribui and mi'ut. Whereas this baraita follows Rabbi Ishmael. He says kol pratu klal, and he says you doesn't have to shave totally. All right, as Rav Ashi is really the peshat of the simple answer, historical answer, that there's no reason to put the midrash together with the Mishnah. These are in fact two different sources, two different authors. Did Tanya. Now, what would Rabbi Akiva say about this law? Here we know it from a different baraita. V'haya bayom hashibi'i galach et kol se'aro riba. Et rosho v'et zekano v'et kabot einav mi'et. Et kol se'aro yigalech hazav riba. Riba u'mi'et v'riba. Riba hakol. So we're going to break down the pasuk in the same way that you have a general rule, but instead of calling it klal, we're calling it a something that is inclusive, and then the detailed list that says his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. That's a limiting. Those are limiting words, and then again it says all the hair of his body, all of his hair. That's a inclusive word. So when you have something like this, riba, then you should include everything in it. My riba de kule gufeh. And when we say including everything, we mean really everything on his body. Also, in that case, why have the middle clause at all of limitation? My the only thing we're excluding is nose hair, because it's not on the body, that's inside his body, and so that is excluded. So you see that the ribui and mi'ut is a little bit different than klal pratu klal. Klal pratu klal is more conceptual. As we've seen in the beginning of the Masechet, we had an extensive discussion of the difference between these two approaches, and klal pratu klal is more conceptual, right? What is similar to the details, and so now we see, right, some things are similar, some things are not. Whereas ribui mi'ut, ribui is much more technical and basically is going to include everything, unless it's actually just not on the body at all. Okay, so in the end, we see that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael just disagree about this, and it's not a case of a midrash uprooting halakha, uprooting the midrash. There's halakha follows one interpretation, and that's Rabbi Akiva's interpretation. That's the Mishnah, and Rabbi Ishmael follows a different interpretation. There's no reason why Rabbi Ishmael would include this on his list of 3 items. And okay, so the bottom line here, right, so far is that we have 3 reasons why Mesorah would not be a good candidate for inclusion on Rabbi Ishmael's original list. And therefore, Rabbi Ishmael, when he said 3 items, it sounds like those 3 items only, and he didn't include Sotah on it. And since he didn't include Sotah, that sounds like Sotah is not a good example. It would not belong on the list. And so, why not? Must be because, according to Rabbi Ishmael, for Sotah, it has to be afar, literally earth, and efed, meaning ashes, would not be good. Okay, so if we follow this so far, then ashes would not be good. But you see that this proof depends on a lot of things, depends on whether there might be other items that are not included on the list, and that itself is subject to other lots of interpretation. Okay, so we want to look for a more conclusive proof. Do we have one? Mai have Allah. What's the bottom line about this? Mai have Allah is like after that discussion was completed, maybe some generations later. Let's reopen this topic, right? What's the conclusion? Tashemad amarav huna barashe amarav en sham afar mevi rak bubit yarak umekadesh. Oh, here, look at this baraita, or rather, look at the statement of Rav that says if there is no afar, if there's no earth, then you can bring compost from vegetables, and you can consecrate the water with it and use that for sotah. So look at that. If you don't have earth, you can use something else. So it's just like you could use compost, maybe that also means you can use other items like ashes. And therefore the answer is yes. Velohi, but you know what? That's actually not a good proof. Rak bubit yarak hu dehavai afar, efer la havai afar. Compost of vegetables, that's permitted because it turns into dust. I mean, it turns into earth, right? When you put compost, it actually turns into soil, and you could just, you can grow things in it. You can put it back onto the ground, and so therefore that makes sense that could be called afar, whereas ashes is more significantly different from afar, and so better reason to say no, you cannot. And so in the end, there was no proof from no necessary proof from the second source, and the first source has a possible proof that it's not included on the list, so therefore it has to be earth, and ashes will not work. Okay, good. And now we go to the next section of the Mishnah. The Mishnah taught that you have to take, for the Sotah, you take some of the dirt from the floor and you put it into the vessel with the water. How much do you have to put? Enough that the dust is visible upon the water. Tenora banan, shalosha serichin sheyera'u. Now they mentioned one, we're going to mention three laws, two others, that you have to mix two things together, and the mixture has to be sufficient that it is visible. So these three items, afar sotah, that's what we just mentioned. You have to put enough dust into the water that you can see the dust. Ve'efer para, the ashes of the para aduma. You take the cow and you burn it, and you have the ashes. The ashes have to be mixed with water. How much? Has to be enough that you can see the ashes. Verok yevama. And also a yevama, if she does chalitza, one of the parts is she has to spit in front of the yavam. It doesn't have to be spit in his face, just towards him. And the spit has to be sufficient that the judges that are there can actually see the spit. So it has to be, sizable enough that it can be seen. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Ameru Af Dam Sipor. Rabbi Yishmael added a fourth case, that of the blood of the Mesorah bird. The Mesorah has to take two birds. One of them, he slaughters it, and the blood goes into a vessel with water in it. How much water, how much blood? Has to be in a ratio where it's visible that this looks like blood. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael only, whereas Tanakama, Rabbanan, disagree. Okay, Rabbi Yishmael is the hero of this daf, right? He was the focus before, and once again, we're going to focus on Rabbi Yishmael. My Tamad Rabbi Yishmael. What's the Rabbi Yishmael source? That the Mesorah blood, the Mesorah's bird's blood has to be seen in the mixture. Tichtiv v'tabal otam bedam hasipor v'tanya bedam yachol bedam velo b'mayim tamod omar b'mayim. Here is the pasuk that we're making reference to from Vayikra Yud Daled. Right, this is a pasuk we saw before. That you have to slaughter the bird over on top of the earthenware vessel that has fresh water in it. Okay, we're going to come back to this in a second. This al mayim chayim, and then it goes on and says v'lakach es ha'erez v'et ha'ezob v'et shinya tulat v'et ha'sipor ha'chaya. So then the Kohen is going to take the three items that we mentioned, plus the live bird, it stays alive, that other bird, and that combination of all those four things one takes and dips into the blood. He's going to dip it into the mixture of the earthenware vessel, which has both blood and water in it, and then that he's going to use vizat habayit sheva pe'amim, that he'll sprinkle on the house that has sarat 7 times. And so this pasuk where we're dealing with says v'taval bedam, it says you dip it in the blood, and then it says you dip it in the water. So we're trying to figure out which one is it. Is it the blood? Is it the water? And so the Braita says blood. It sounds like just blood and not water, but then it says water. So maybe it means water and not blood. But it says blood. Hakesad, maybe mayim shedam sipor nikar behen v'chama revi'it. The answer is you have to dip it in water in which the blood of the bird is recognizable. Now, how much will it be recognizable? A revi'it. If you have a typical size bird and its blood goes into a revi'it of water, then it will still, if someone looks at it, says, oh, that's blood. And I mean, it'll be red. Even if it's a lot of water, it'll still be red, but it has to be more than red. It has to actually look like blood. Okay, V'Rabbanan, now Rabbanan who disagreed with this, they said that it does not have to be visible, doesn't have to be noticeable and look like blood. So what are they going to do with this pasuk that has a combination? They said we need it for the simple reading that you have to dip it with blood and the water together, and not separately blood and then dip it in water. Rabbi Ishmael, don't you need the pasuk to teach you the basic law that you need blood and water has to be dipped in both? No, and then if it just to teach me that simple law, it could have just said bahem, in them, right? And I would have known that it gets dipped in the two items that were already mentioned. But how do I know that? So from since it said, it could have said bahem to teach me that I need to dip it in both. So why is it I go and specify dam and mayim? It shows that it has to be the blood has to be recognizable in the water. That's Rabbi Ishmael's law. But Rabbanan, what do you say about that? Why does it have to specify blood and water? Why not just said bahem? Because if it said only bahem, I would have said, I know that it has to be dipped in two liquids, but I still would have said maybe it's separately. You put it in blood first, mix it in blood, and you also dip it in the water in two separate vessels. But how do I know that the two liquids have to be mixed together? That's why it has to say dam and mayim, that you have to mix it together. But there's still no derivation that it has to be recognizable as blood. Rabbi Ishmael says, no, the fact that I have to mix it, that I already know from the previous pasuk, where it says that you slaughter one of the birds, right, as we said here, el kelicheres al mayim chayim. So if you're doing shechita on the bird of the bird that from which you get the blood, and you do it on top of the earthenware vessel that already has the water in it, obviously the blood is going in and will be mixed in. So I already know that it's going to be mixed in. But Rabbanan, what are you going to do with that pasuk? The previous pasuk, samuch lemana v'nin ketinhu livridin ulkabele ledam b'mana acharina kamash malan. Rabbanan says, no, even from that pasuk, maybe that I could interpret it to mean only that I have to do the shechita near, right, above so I have the earthenware vessel below, and so I do shechita above it, but then I don't let any blood go in, right? As soon as I do shechita, I'll close the veins and then move it and let the veins drain into a separate vessel. And so I wouldn't know necessarily from that pasuk that have to be mixed together, and therefore I need the next pasuk to teach me that no, I dip it in the blood and in the water. That means that it has to be mixed together. But I don't have any source that there has to be a noticeable ratio. So that's how the Banan say, and whereas Rabbi Ishmael says, no, from the previous pasuk, obviously, if I'm doing shechita over it, this is very strange. I'm going to close the veins and put another one. If I'm doing shechita over the water, obviously it's going into the water. And so next pasuk that says, and dip it into the blood and into the water, that means it has to be a ratio that is recognizable as blood. Okay, so that's the source of each of those opinions. Now, so Rabbi Yirmiyah asks a question within Rabbi Yoshua, who he said has to be a recognizable ratio, and that ratio is one bird per revi'it of water. He says, hold on, what if the bird is very big and has a lot of water? Maybe that will push out the water, because only a little bit of water, and so it won't be recognizable as a mixture. Or the other way around, if it's a small bird, and so the blood of the small bird will be effaced, will be not recognizable because there's so much water in it. So maybe the ratio should depend on the size of the bird. קטן ואין לך גדול שמתחית את המים ואין לך קטנה שמתחית מפני המים. And so Rabbi Zara responded to Rabbi Yirmiyah and says, I told you already that you should not ask questions outside the bounds of halakha, right? Just ask practical questions and stop asking about these theoretical questions. So what is the answer? The rabbis measured using a sparrow. The sparrow, that's the animal that you have to use for a mesorah. And if you look at sparrows, yes, they are bigger and smaller, but there's no giant sparrow and there's no tiny sparrow. Even the biggest sparrow or the smallest sparrow are the good ratio that the blood will be recognizable in the water, and the water also will be recognizable, and so it's perfect. Therefore, stop asking about theoretical questions. We're talking about sparrows, and in sparrows, there's nothing so big and so small that you have to worry about. Okay, good. Tenor Banan. Ikdim afad lamayim pasul. Rabbi Shimon machshir. My tamad Rabbi Shimon. So last halakha on this issue is what if a person put afad dust first and then put the water after? The Rabbanan say it's no good, and Rabbi Shimon says it's fine. What's the reason? What's the source for Rabbi Shimon who says that it's fine? Now, this source is a Tosefta and Para, but we're going to see that the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon think that their opinions are true, not only regarding Para Duma, but also regarding Sotah. Now, let's look at the Pesukim for a second, because we're going to be looking at them in depth, and see what we would say just based on the plain reading of the Pesukim. Here is from Bimidbar 5, regarding Sotah, so it's clearly you take the water first, and then min afad yikach hakohen v'natan el hamayim. So it seems very clear in Sotah that you should put the water first and then the dust afterwards. In the context of Paraduma, it says v'lakechu latameh, right, for the person who's tameh, me'afad serefa tahatat v'natan alav mayim hayim el keli. So here it says you take from the ashes of the paraduma, and on the ashes you place v'natan alav is referring to the ashes, you place mayim hayim. So it seems pretty clear here that you put the water on the ashes, the opposite of Sotah. El Keli, everything in the vessel. Okay, we're going to see from this Mayim Chaim El Keli, we're going to learn Mayim Chaim goes directly in the vessel. This was going to be one derivation. So the water actually goes first. Okay, but that's going to be the derasha. But the simple reading is afad first. And another question, how come it says afad? Here we're talking about ashes. It should say efed serefat hatat. So why does it say afad? Okay, anyway, from a simple reading, it looks like in Paraduma, you put the ashes first. In Sotah, you put the water first. And therefore, when we come back to here, since this is said in the context of Paraduma, so putting the ashes first sounds like it should be the right way to do it. And instead, the Rabbanan say, no, ashes first is pasul, you have to put the water first. So if they're saying that for Paraduma, certainly for Sotah also. So according to Rabbanan, water first always is necessary. And if you do the water second, no good at all. Rabbi Shimon, in both contexts, is going to say, it's fine, you could do it this way, you could do it that way. So let's look at the source for Rabbi Shimon first. Dichtib. ולקחו לטמא מעפר שרפת החטאת. ותניא אמר רבי שמעון וכי עפר הוא, regarding Paraduma, it says you take from the earth of the burnt chatat, the Paraduma ashes. Well, if it's ashes, why is it calling it afar? V'lo efer hu, shina katuv mamashmo ladun hemenu gezerah shava. The pasuk purposely changed it from efer to afar so that you can make a gezerah shava between Paraduma and Sotah. Ne'mar kan afar, v'ne'mar lehalan afar, ma lehalan afar al gabe mayim, afkan afar al gabe mayim. Just like afar over there means regarding Sotah, but this is all said in the context of Paraduma. So just like afar regarding Sotah, you put the water first and the dirt after, so too regarding paraduma, you put the water first and you put the ashes on top. That's why it calls the ashes afad, so that you can learn from Sotah. So far so good. Now, makan higdim afad lamayim kasher, afdala nikdim afad lamayim kasher. Yet the gezerah shava goes both ways. Just like here regarding paraduma, it does say afad first, and then you put the mayim. And that's kosher. So too regarding Sotah, if you put the dirt first and the water after, even though it's the opposite way of the simple reading, nevertheless it's kasher. So there you go. We connect both to learn that either order in either context is fine. V'hata minelan. Now regarding paraduma, and Gemara is asking about that. How do you know that it's okay to do it either way? Today, ketib alav alma efed beresha. On the one hand, the pasuk, a simple reading of the pasuk says, "V'natan alav mayim chayim." So you have the ashes on top of the ashes. You put the water. So good. That means the ashes come first. Uchtib mayim chayim el keli. On the other hand, if you take that phrase alone, mayim chayim el keli, alma mayim beresha. You're putting the water into the vessel, means the water goes directly into the vessel with nothing interposing. Right? So that means the water goes first. Hakesad, rasa zenoten, rasa zenoten. How could you fulfill both phrases of the pasuk? It means it's optional. You have to get a mixture. It doesn't matter which one you put first. Regarding paraduma, and they're connected afad, so Sotah also doesn't matter. You could do either way first. Good. Now we understand the source of Rabbi Shimon. V'Rabbanan el keli davka alav le'areban. Rabbanan say el keli, the second part, the end of the pasuk, water goes directly into the vessel, water first, and that's in paraduma. So the water has to be first. What does it mean? Natan alav. Alav just means that it has to be mixed. You put the water first, you put the ashes after, but it has to be on top. In some way, the water has to be also can't leave the ashes floating on top of the water. Rather, the water has to then go on top of the ashes. That we learn from that you have to mix it. You have to mix it later, but the water always goes first. Vema alav davka el keli shetechiyutan bekeli. So we ask Rabbanan, why are you taking el keli literally and alav to mean mixture? Say the other way around. Alav means you have to put the ashes first and the water on top of the ashes. And the phrase el keli, then we can learn something else from that you have to get the water el keli, that the water has to go directly into the keli. Right? Mayim hayim, you have to go to the spring and fill up the water, the vessel directly from the spring. So that we could use el keli to learn that law. So why are you learning this way? Learn the other way, and the ashes might be first. And the rabbis, the Rabbanan, will answer, no, we see in all places, in all contexts, the machshir, the item that makes something usable, goes on top. And so too here, you make the item that makes it usable, it goes on top. In other words, like Sotah, where you have the water first. Water is just plain water. But it's the dust that you're adding to it that turns it into the item that the Sotah can drink. So, right, water first and dirt after for Sotah. So too with paraduma, you're going to bring the water first, and then the thing that's special is the ashes of the paraduma. The thing that's special should go second, right? Because you want to add it to, and then as soon as you add it, now it becomes paraduma, water, and so that always goes second, which is really quite the opposite. We were talking about before cases of the halakha being the opposite of the peshat of a pasuk. So really, this we could add to the list of items where it turns out to be the exact opposite according to Rabbanan. Rabbi Shimon actually kind of makes sense. Like you have to mix it together. Doesn't matter if you do it this way or you do it that way. All is good. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen ve'amen.